Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. We're going to talk about civilization in America and the ancient maize that they found and dated to. It's pretty old, but that's not really, that is part of the point. But this is one of those situations where they discover something pretty advanced that we can't even really truly replicate today. And it kind of leaves us scratching our heads going, well, how did they have the knowledge and the time to really figure this out? And what I'm talking about is the domestication of corn to what it is today. And I don't even know if it's domestication so much as it's transforming grass into something with kernels. But before we get into that, I got to preface it with the lead up to how they got to, how the scientists got to even studying corn in the first place. So in about the early 1900s, there's a scientist named Walter Huff. He went to a New Mexico cave and he found this ancient ear of maize. Now this cave, in 1905, that's when he went. This cave was extremely dry. There was nothing in the cave that decayed, so he found a bunch of stuff. He found bones, turkey cadavers, brush made from grass, pipes, grinding stones, cigarettes, and yucca leaf sandals. And then he found these maize cobs with the kernels intact. Now, back in 1905, they didn't really have any they didn't have radiocarbon dating. They didn't have they didn't have GPS. They didn't have anything like that. So he just took these back to the museum. And they just sat there for years until this guy named Paul Sidney Martin, like in the 50s, he wanted to settle this debate between the Anasazi people, ancestral Pueblo people. Let me pull up this map. So right here, where Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. If you guys don't know, there are these cliffs in New Mexico, and they're houses that are chipped and carved into the cliff. And these people who occupied it were allegedly the Anasazi people. Paul Sidney Martin, he was trying to settle this debate as to who predated whom. So the Mogollon or the other culture that he thought predated the Anasazi people. So he went to this cave, like he read Huff's work, and he said, okay, we might as well go, this is noteworthy, let's go check it out. So they go to the southwest, and they go to this place called Tularosa, which is where Huff's cave was. And they went there in June 1950, and within 2 summers they found tens of thousands of artifacts. They found pottery, which basically was a smoking gun evidence that it didn't look anything like the Anasazi work. This is definitely Mogollon work. And radiocarbon dating just came out, so they were dated to way earlier than the Anasazis were. The Anasazi were like, I think 800, 900 to like 1300 AD, something like that. These guys were close to 2,000 years old. I think in some cases 2,500 years old. But anyway, among the objects at Tularosa, he found 33,000 ears of ancient maize. 33,000, that's a lot. Some of the cobs were as old as 2,500 years. This suggested that the cave had been inhabited before the Anasazi, and then they came with the dates. The Mogollon had occupied what is now Sonora and Chihuahua, Mexico, so around here. So basically most of northern Mexico and the borders with New Mexico and Arizona. From 280 to when the Spaniards came, that was all Mogollon territory. The Mogollon culture played a large role in introducing maize to societies north of the Rio Grande. So the Rio Grande is this huge river, and it was like a natural border between the tribes at the time, or the cultures. What they did, they couldn't analyze the genetic makeup of the maize at the time, but lately some other researchers use DNA probes and other technologies. So they figured out that it was a 9,000 year process by which the Native Americans transformed teosinte, which is that that wild grass I was talking about. It didn't have any ears, any cobs. It's just like just grass. That's the best way to describe it. and they turned that into maize, which is a highly productive, highly elaborate plant that can thrive in a cool, temperate climate. So, first, there's a lot of questions here, and there are some mysteries that are actually getting close to getting solved. So I'll get into that in a second. So first of all, if it's a 9,000 year process to actually do it, how did they? That means someone in the remote past must have figured this out and took 9,000 years to figure out back then. Because there's no way that they just did this by the seat of their pants and just thought it was like some thought experiment among them and they decided to take a chance. I don't know. Unless they had some profound mushroom DMT trip or something, and it came to them in a dream, like how Nikola Tesla found, in his version of events, the story of how he found out about alternating current. He hallucinated the blueprints. Unless something like that happened, then someone must have passed on that information. It must have been some sort of agricultural technique to turn basically nothing into something. And the other reason why this is intriguing is because people now, we can eat corn, but it's really not something our bodies used to processing, because our biology is 200,000 plus years old at the very least, probably older. And corn, if this is true, corn is very recent. I mean, within 10,000 years. So it makes sense and it's understandable that our bodies have a tough time processing something new when it evolved, allegedly. It allegedly evolved by eating other things that weren't corn. So this is a really interesting story. I mean, corn there's a lot. I know there are a lot of documentaries about corn and how it's a really, really interesting and mysterious plant and very resilient. But anyway, I just thought that was really thought-provoking, and I think it opens a lot of doors. It answers some questions, but it opens a lot of other questions now. Some of the earliest samples were 6,300 years old, and they were bred by people focused on boosting the crop yield by increasing the size of cobs and kernels. So these people had other people to feed. They were thinking about large-scale cultivation, and they wanted to get the most out of what they were growing and the most out of the land. So there's no doubt that they had some intent on and some goals on exactly what they wanted out of this process. And then later on in Mogollon times, those growers were selecting for starch and grain qualities because they were making tortillas and tamales and all that kind of stuff. It's very interesting to note, and it's important to note, that this is a far more complex than anything our scientists now can do in a lab, even with all the genetic engineering, even with CRISPR and all that stuff. So how did they do this, and where did they get the idea from? What do you guys think? Let me know. Sometimes you guys have a lot of gems in your comments that I didn't think about. So please, I'm opening up the floor to you guys. Do you think it was just something spontaneous and it just came out of human ingenuity and human imagination and probably a mushroom trip or a psychedelic? Or was it some sort of education that was passed on, some sort of ancient technique from the Pleistocene or something that was passed on to the people now? Were there other foods sort of like this? Like maybe rice? Was rice like that to Asia, or wheat? I know wheat was Middle East, I think. Something like that. Yeah, so I don't know. Sometimes a lot of unique and interesting and spontaneous things happen in human history like this. So was it a coincidence? What were these farmers on? Like what were they cooked up to that they got this idea? So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.